scintillating evening to the respected dignitaries and all present here. I, Dr. Jaimini Vyas, along with my team, take a privilege to welcome you all in this seminar of webinar series on artificial intelligence on behalf of KCG. I welcome Anju Sharma Madam, M. Nagarajan Sir, Professor A.U. Patel Sir, and our today's expert. Our today's session is on artificial intelligence. Beyond artificial intelligence, what is artificial intelligence and not artificial intelligence? Before proceeding to our seminar, worshipping of God becomes the essential part for the successful completion. Prayer is talking to God Almighty, the creator of whole universe. So, let us start our webinar series with the presence of God. For that, I will ask Mrs. Yogini to offer the prayer to Lord Ganesha.
Vakratunda Mahakaya Surakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurumi Deva Sarvakarye Susarvada Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Vidyarupena Sanstita Namastasye 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 Namo Namah. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogini. Now I would like to request the dais guest to come ahead for lighting up the lamp. Ma'am and sir, please.
Harihi Om Agnirjyotirjyotiragnihi Swaha Surjah Jyotirjyoti Surjo Swaha Agne Varcho Jyoti Varchah Swaha Jyotihi Surjah Surjo Jyotihi Swaha.
Thank you, respected ones, and Dr. Mahesh Patel sir for making the atmosphere more pleasant and blissful. Proceeding towards the event, I will solicit Dr. Yogesh Yadav, OSD Extension KCG, to give a warm welcome and memento to Anju ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for your presence, and thank you, Yadav sir. Now, I would like to request Dr. Mahesh sir to give a warm welcome to M. Nagarajan sir, CEO Higher Education and CEO KCG and Director Higher Education. Proceeding further, I would like to request Professor A.U. Patel sir to give a floral welcome to Mr. Sachin Gaur sir, our today's expert. Thank you so much, sir. Lastly, I would like to welcome Professor A.U. Patel, sir, and I would request Yadav, sir, to give him a warm welcome. Furthermore, I will ask Professor A.U. Patel, sir, to give his amiable welcome to the guest as well as the audience. I would like to request A.U. Patel, sir.
Good evening to everybody. Anoh Bhadra Kartavyo Yantu Vishwatah. Let noble thoughts come to us from all the directions. Knowledge Consortium of Gujarat, following the principle and philosophy with the intention of spreading knowledge across through organizing the series of knowledge sharing seminars. This step has been taken up under the guidance of Honorable Principal Secretary, Department of Education, Government of Gujarat, and CEO KCG and Director, Higher Education, Government of Gujarat. They are constantly guiding us, providing incentives and entire education since last 5 years, coming to unparalleled heights in higher education. I would like to thank our eminent guest and speaker, Mr. Sachin Gaur, founder and CEO, MIX ORG Consulting Services Private Limited, for agreeing to be a part of this seminar and share his knowledge with us. Also, special thanks to our respectable dignitary, Mrs. Anju Sharma, Principal Secretary, and Shri M. Nagarajan, Director, Higher Education, for giving their precious time for this seminar. We know that AI and 3D printing, online learning, a variety of technologies are making the biggest impact on student learning today. These technologies also allow educators to account for the shorthand and big attention and on-demand expectations of many of our present students. We are happy that KCG is now starting a series of 100 webinars on emerging technology, and this is a beginning. Trends in education technology and growing usage of EdTech tools show the power and potential of these additional materials and methods of teaching provided to students today. Education is about sharing knowledge, and technology allows for the seamless knowledge sharing and collaboration with faculty, students, and professionals around the world. I welcome you all. You have accepted our invitation and remain present for this webinar. I welcome and express thanks to researchers, scholars, students, and also those who will see all these webinars on YouTube also in future. Artificial intelligence was founded as an academic discipline in 1956, and in the years since has experienced several waves of progress and optimism. Our guest is expert in this subject, and he will guide you better. We have given you one pamphlet and biodata also. If you will read, you will find that he is one of the best experts on this subject. Again, I welcome you all. and dignitaries and express my sincere thanks to all. Thank you very much.
So it's a pleasure that Madam is going to come over the dais. We welcome you, ma'am. I would like to request Anju Sharma, ma'am, to give her words and address. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Dr. Sachin Kaur, Mr. Nagarajan, Mr. Dr. A. Patel, all the viewers here. We are starting this series of webinars on emerging technology. And today, artificial intelligence is the first in that line. And you'll be getting many more. We have identified around 15 subjects on which we will be organizing these webinars. The idea is to orient these students to emerging technologies, and also more than the students, the faculty members, so that when they get higher level inputs on the emerging technologies, they understand what it is, and they develop a tendency to do self-research. So with that, I will not speak much. I would like you all to take maximum benefit of this facility that we are creating. We will upload these lectures on Udyam website, on Udyam portal. These will be available to all students and faculty members. And we are trying to evolve it into a beautiful platform of learning for you all. I hope we succeed into it, and I'm sure with all your cooperation, we would be able to do that. And in the coming, say, 3 to 4 years, some of you may become experts in emerging technologies and may themselves come to deliver address gatherings on these technologies and do great work in emerging technologies. Thank you so much. So now let us hear Mr. Sachin Kaur. Let me tell you, Mr. Nagarajan himself takes a lot of interest in technology, and he is the force behind the Cogent portal and all the work that we've been doing in the on the technology side in higher education. But I have restrained him from speaking now, but he'll speak to you later about the various aspects and the vision that he has in his mind. Thank you so much. Let's hear you, Mr. Sachin Kaur.
It is my great honor to introduce our speaker. Our speaker is Mr. Sachin Kaur, sir. He is a cybersecurity expert as well as the founder and CEO of Mix.org Consulting Services Private Limited. Sachin Kaur, sir, is double masters in mobile security and cryptography from Aalto University, Finland and University of Tartu. He has been a keen technology innovator with 10 technology patents granted at US Patent Office. He has been awarded in top 10 innovations in India. He is active in the space of AI and information security. Today, we are privileged to have an opportunity to listen to him this evening. On behalf of all gathered here, I welcome you, sir. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Especially my warm regards to Mr. M. Nagarajan, Madam Anju Sharma, Professor Patel, and Knowledge Consortium of Gujarat for inviting me here and to share my experience with this topic. And I also happy to see that some of you have physically come, some of you are viewing this remotely. And I don't know if I can do justice to the topic. The topic is so vast. Professor Patel already, hinted about the history of AI, mentioning already the word 1950. But the way I have structured this discussion today or this lecture is to, let's say, stretch your mind in a way that you are aware, what different people are doing, and maybe we can look at AI just beyond as a technology construct. And I think AI is becoming increasingly a topic which is like electricity. So electricity powers a lot of appliances. So the same way we see that AI is also powering a lot of disciplines. So just as a quiz here, any of you see this painting on this screen here? Can anybody guess who has made this painting? Anybody wants to say yes, no, maybe? So it's an AI generated painting and it was sold for $500,000. So let's say round about 4 crores, right? So this kind of a work is done by a kind of neural networks which are known as generative adversarial networks. So AI is slowly entering into the domains which are not just, let's say very logical, but also very creative. And I don't know if you recognize this girl, anybody? So this photo is from a website which is called This Person Does Not Exist. So this person is not real. This face is of a person which does not exist. So imagine a scenario, I am a filmmaker. I want to make a film, but I pay actors and actress. Right now as I'm talking, there is a campaign going on viral wherein you upload a photo of your dead relative and you can get a video out of it. Anybody has seen that? So you upload a single photo of, let's say, of your dead relative and the AI will generate a video. So a lot of people are trying to resurrect their dead relatives, So this is a company called as MyHeritage which is doing this. So imagine there is a lot of, in a way copyright involved when somebody is using your face. So with this kind of a model, if you go to this website, This Person Does Not Exist, they will show you always a random face which is generated by again a generative adversarial network. So of course Professor Patel said in his brief address that AI has existed since 1950s. So why are we talking about now? So if I have got your attention with the 2 examples, let me start from a small story. So long back I studied in Finland, doing my education. And Finland is a very innovative country, especially when it comes to technology. So I was taking a flight some years back. In the flight I picked up the magazine and the magazine talked about one of my professor's work. So what was the desire of my professor? I imagine many of you are professors here. So my professor wanted to teach 1% of his country about AI. So how they did it? They designed a MOOC, a 32-hour MOOC. They went to their president. They made the president do the course. 1 year later, 4% of Finland had done that course. So a single professor could imagine and educate 4% of their country, but they did not stop there. So my professor got brave and he thought, if I could teach my country, why can't I teach my neighboring country? So they sent their minister to challenge Sweden, and Sweden also took the challenge. So Sweden also, started doing the course, because since course was online, anybody could do it. Then when Finland was the president of European Union, so Finnish government offered this course to the European Union, and now this population becomes comparable to India because the combined population of European Union is close to 1 billion people. So now my professor calls it as a 1% population challenge. So let's say if my professor could start this in 2019 and today in 2021, they are looking to achieve training 1% of 1 billion people, that's the power of a single academic, right? So just to, show you, this course is called Elements of AI. And I saw this today morning, I think close to 12% of Finnish population in numbers have done this course. So I find this kind of very inspiring and remarkable story. This is the Finnish president, when, they did it as a marketing campaign. So around 2 years back, my professor was visiting Delhi and I was talking to him. So he was visiting with the foreign minister of Finland. And I was talking to him, okay, Sasu, you guys have built an awareness course. So what is next? So now they have launched a new course which is called Building AI. So first they built elements of AI, now they are building AI. So basically, of course, they wanted to, create an imagination in the population what is possible with AI. Now they want that some part of that population to build something with AI. Now imagine if some of the people are able to build a similar kind of algorithm, what gets enabled as next is that they can build a marketplace for AI models. Meaning, if you are looking to buy an AI model, so why can't 4 different students sell you the same thing? So it becomes like a marketplace. So when we go on Amazon, we buy, let's say, biscuits from 5 different companies. So why can't we buy, student-built AI models, from different teams? And of course, that AI need to be, assessed on accuracy or different parameters. So I think we are soon going to enter into a domain where we will see this kind of things also happen in India, right? So of course India is not lagging behind. So India has also authored a lot of strategy documents. I don't know if you have seen Niti Aayog's document. But last year, a big conference was organized by the Ministry of IT, and it was called the RAISE conference, which is Responsible AI for Social Empowerment. And if some of you are interested, you can still go and find the lectures online, depending on your topic of interest, because it had participation from the highest level, from the Prime Minister to the various experts, right? So, but as I said, why now? So if you try and understand that if you were doing calculations, so one of the places I have worked in Geneva is called CERN, and in 1960s, computers were expensive. So they used to hire Indians because Indians were good with mathematics. So Indians, and also elsewhere in NASA, humans were called computers because they used to do computation. After that, computers came, so the cost of arithmetic went down. So we no more use humans to do computation, right? In the same way, you can imagine what do we want to do in many parts of our life. For example, here in this image, you can see a doctor reading an X-ray image. So what is the doctor doing? Doctor is classifying an X-ray, whether it's a normal X-ray or a abnormal X-ray. So if my cost of decision making goes down, similar to cost of, arithmetic, that is what, we have seen as a moment in the case of AI. So that moment we can call it as ImageNet moment. That happened in 2015. So ImageNet is a competition, which every year happens, wherein people submit their AI algorithms to classify images and identify images as per 1,000 classes. So it was again a professor whose bright ideas gave the world ImageNet. So it was Fei-Fei Li from Stanford. She and her collaborators collected money and put a lot of humans to the task of annotating images, and every year people will participate. In 2012, Geoffrey Hinton's team, showed a good result, and already in 2015, I think it was Microsoft ResNet, which achieved an accuracy higher than humans. So if you see that, it's only a matter of time that a lot of professions like radiology, right? We don't need radiologists, in time to come, because probably AI can do a better job. So that is just to make you understand, that we have crossed that seminal moment, and I will be coming to this topic again and again, wherein some competition enables, AI to create this evidence that AI is going to take over, the level of accuracy or prediction in that domain. So I have spent over the last 2 years or so reading a lot of books. These are some of the books I have read. If you are interested, you can buy or read some of them. I'd like to bring special attention to some of them. In fact, I was speaking to some people yesterday here in Ahmedabad that, for example, this book, AI Superpowers, is by a guy called as Kai-Fu Lee. He's a very famous investor in the AI domain. He has invested in around 350 companies. If you read the book, the first chapter or the first page of the book dedicates the book by Kai-Fu Lee to Professor Raj Reddy. Who is Professor Raj Reddy? He is the Turing Award winner, and he was also present with the Prime Minister in the RACE conference as one of the inaugural speaker. And in that way, I was amazed as an Indian, when I open a book by one of the most prolific investor in AI and I see, an Indian name. So it was quite inspiring to me. And of course, I leave you to find out more. But there are many other books that, I would like to bring to your attention if you are interested. For example, this Deep Learning Revolution by Terry Senoski is also a very good book. But I have built this talk based on these books, so I hope you will enjoy. So let me open few more questions for you, since you are academics, intellectuals. So in the book Sapiens, Yuval Noah Harari asked this question: what is the advantage humans have over other species? So I don't know if anybody wants to answer this, that why we are so advanced and not other species are. So some of you may already say that we have a language, right? And Yuval Noah Harari says that beyond language, what is our advantage is culture. So we are able to document our knowledge outside our human body. And that enables a lot of us, let's say, to learn from previous generations. And that is what, let's say, other species lack. And maybe somewhere in there, is making us more intelligent. But a bigger question could be that if we are chasing artificial intelligence, is the objective to be super intelligent? So what are the other ways we can be super intelligent? Anybody would like to say, if you were intelligent at the level of X, what would you do to take this human race to be intelligent at 100x levels, right? So this is what, in the book Super Intelligence, Nick Bostrom answers this question, that how could you achieve super intelligence, right? And AI is only one of them. Then another Nobel Prize winning question is that today there are two fields of AI scientists, one who believe that we are building AI, but sooner or later we will reach a stage where what we have currently is what we call as narrow AI, meaning if we build something which is, able to detect a cat from a cat, sooner or later, we can build an AI which can work as well as a human. And in that scenario, we call that intelligence as general intelligence. So some people say, if we make something as generally intelligent as human, would that machine also become conscious? So some AI scientists believe, yes, consciousness is an emergent phenomena. And some scientists believe that consciousness is not an emergent phenomena. So last year, Roger Penrose got the Nobel Prize for Physics. And he is one of the person who believes that consciousness is not an emergent phenomena. So no matter how intelligent machine you build, you will not be able to build consciousness in it, because Roger Penrose believes that consciousness comes from something called as microtubules in the cells of our body. So these topics will remain debatable. Anybody who will answer it maybe get the next Nobel Prize. Then there are other topics around AI, like, some people say, like Elon Musk, we should prevent building artificial general intelligence. Meaning, if we build machine which is better than human being, sooner or later machine will kill us. We have all seen in the movies, Terminator movies, where Arnold Schwarzenegger and other kind of characters have painted a very bad scenario about machines. So this is another question, that if we build something which is more intelligent than us, can we still control that machine? Or should we even try building that kind of a machine? And if we want to build such a machine, is it harmful for us or not? So as I said, many people like Elon Musk and others, they believe we should not go into that path. But still we are going on to that path. So I think there are many questions that we need to ask as a scientist. And if we can answer them, definitely, we can do a good job. So I'll not delve into greater detail here, but these are just to make you aware that if you do literature survey on this topic, you will find lot of, insights. But as I was asking, what are the ways to be super intelligent? These are the 4 ways that Nick Bostrom identifies. One, of course, is that AI. So today, if you meet somebody somehow through the time travel and that person comes from 100 years back, and let's say they will ask you what is the capital of Seychelles, maybe you can just look at your mobile and answer that. So in a way, that mobile connected with internet is part of your body and it is making you intelligent, right? So in that way, AI is accessible to all of us today, and it gives us superhuman capability, which let's say 100, 200 years back, we did not have. But if we want to go without AI, what are the ways we can become super intelligent? So what he proposes is brain-computer interfaces, which many of you must be aware. These are already 30,000-40,000 rupees worth of devices that are available in the market that you can wear, and let's say by thinking you can switch off the lights of this auditorium or move the cursor on this laptop, right? So what you are doing, you are removing that interface of typing and you are doing computation by the way of thinking, right? So Elon Musk is building this company called as Neuralink, where they are planning to do implants in the human brain so that the neurosignals are accessible directly to the machine and the machine processing that directly accessible to human brain. So imagine, let's say 10 years from now, if we are successful in this kind of a journey, then many of us might have implants and we may not carry, mobile phones, and we are able to do access internet just by thinking and, in a way extend our brain, So if we go back to what Yuval Noah Harari's thesis of our species advantage of other species was culture or language, then in a way it will become access to that supercomputation, just by thinking. So I think we are getting into an interesting times, but there are other ways also. So if we are into gene editing, maybe we can, make designer babies and in a way skip the natural evolution and make, human babies which are even more, intelligent. So of course that is again a dangerous path, and maybe ethically, people will have reservations. Then there is one more possibility, that if we take the whole human brain, ultimately what is happening in the brain is like bunch of neurons, not bunch of but billions of neurons, and which are connected in a trillion way possible with each other. If we can copy this entire network into silicon, now what is the opportunity with silicon? Silicon runs at least 1 million times faster than human brain. So the signals that travel in human brain, they travel at the order of milliseconds, and in nanoseconds what you do on silicon. So if I were to take any one of you and let's say convert your brain in silico, I could do that same conversation with you 1 million times faster, right? And doing something 1 million times faster, I think is also in a way intelligence, right? So all of this is a distant possibility. Some of our near possibility, like AI is a very near possibility. Technology wise, we already have CRISPR for gene editing. Technology wise, we already have brain computer interface. What we don't have is whole brain emulation. So we are a bit distant there. But maybe there are other methods also to be super intelligent, but these are the methods proposed by Nick Bostrom. So in my understanding, when I have spent a lot of reading in last 2 years on this topic, so I have understood that, okay, we look at not just AI, but we look at topic of intelligence. And when we look at topic of intelligence, then the components that the scientists are debating, of course, consciousness, natural evaluation, causality, and within AI, there is a field of AI which is what Professor Patel referred the old AI. So people call it good old fashioned AI. And then the current field which is called deep learning. So a lot of people, use the words, in very much that if they say AI, they may mean deep learning, and if they say deep learning, they may mean AI, right? So I will try to share a bit of difference there. Then of course, the current deep learning models are inspired by how human brain works. So there is a totally field devoted to understand human intelligence, and within that there are two kinds of people that you will find: people from the neuroscience and then people from the computational biology. So what, let's say in next 10-15 years, what we would like to achieve if we want to research in the topic of AI is how can we make more bio-inspired neural networks, because I will tell you in a bit why bio-inspired neural networks may be better than artificial neural networks. And of course, I told you already about superintelligence. So for me, this is a bigger mind map around AI. I hope this kind of expanded your thinking on this topic. So all of this is, a field in itself, and, you can spend a lifetime researching on it. For example, causality is a topic where Julia Pearl has done a lot of fundamental work. And his book, The Book of Why, and he's also the creator of Bayesian algorithms, which is what we use on a daily basis on a website like Amazon. When Amazon recommends us a book, so what it is using is a Bayesian algorithm. And who is the creator of that? The creator of that is, The Book of Why, Julia Pearl. So that was just a bit of, your mental exercise. Now let me also give you a bit of economic viewpoint on it. So there is a very good report on landscape of AI by a think tank in Bangalore. It's called Itihasa. And if you look at this report, it says that, various phases of human evolution when we were hunter-gatherers, if we would have stayed like that, the world's economy would have, doubled in 224,000 years. When we moved to agriculture, the GDP of world started doubling in 909 years. When we moved to industrial society, it started doubling in 6.3 years. Now imagine what Professor Patel also referred, fourth industrial revolution in terms of the technologies, and this wider webinar series is about. So the way economy will double, it will be a matter of months, or sometimes even a matter of days. I don't know how many of you have been chasing the price of Bitcoin, right? So maybe that gives you an indication, how fast things grow on the internet. So this is an economic reason. So a country, so why that professor was worried about teaching his country about AI? Because he wanted to keep his country ahead. And if he managed to achieve that feat, maybe his country would double the GDP, in a matter of months. And if we will not do it, maybe we will not double our GDP, right? So as nations we compete, and that is one of the main motive, why countries are competing to be ahead in AI. But AI is not something futuristic, which is very, much here. This is a list of, let's say, 20 plus AI algorithms, which are already approved by FDA in US to be used in various fields of medicine, right? From radiology to pathology. And mind you, anything that is approved by FDA doesn't happen in a matter of a day. It happens after clinical trials. So basically, what I'm trying to say here in this context, right, that whatever we are discussing, maybe we are still a bit abstract level, trying to make you understand that it is pretty much here, and it's going to impact our work in very many ways. But let me also very quickly tell you what Professor Patel hinted at, that the work of AI is not new. It started already in 1940s, and it kind of stalled in 1990s. So in technical terms, we call that time of 10 years, around 1990s, as AI winter. And around that time, there were three people, Yoshua Bengio, Yann LeCun, and Geoffrey Hinton, who were working on a new kind of approach to do AI, which was not rule-based, which was learning-based. So they were trying a kind of neural network-based approach inspired by the human brain. The key invention that they made around that time was called backpropagation algorithm. So basically what a backpropagation algorithm achieves, it basically does something what we call in mathematics as gradient descent. So basically you have bunch of parameters, it's more like a matrix multiplication, and you are trying to learn some mathematical numbers in which you try to understand a pattern. Now this pattern is not like, okay, you have a, let's say a symbol 1. So I can say how does 1 look like, how does 2 look like, but how about a pattern which is multidimensional, which is in 1,000 dimensions. For us as a human being, we are not able to even imagine a pattern which is more than 3 dimensions. So we cannot even recognize something, which is multidimensional. So what these three guys achieved, that they achieved a method by which you can learn a multi-dimensional pattern. And this field, as I said, in 2012 they got their first breakthrough, because around that time the faster computers became available, more data set became available, and already by 2015 their approach of doing AI, which we today call as deep learning, became so famous that today there is entire young population chasing this dream of learning deep learning. Now these three people got the Turing Award, which is the highest award in computer science, in 2019 already. So of course they were working for 30 years, but their work got recognized in 2012. And they are so powerful today that the first person, who is Yann LeCun, is heading Facebook, Jeffrey Hinton is looking at Google, and Joshua Bengio, he heads Mila, which is Montreal Institute, where they basically all three come from Canada. So this is also called the Canadian Mafia. So in a way, they and their students, control this field of deep learning. But if you look at it from a perspective of the conference of AI, which is NIPS, so NIPS has grown, you can see the numbers. So how popular this conference has become over the years, in terms of, people coming to it. So that is also an indication that how much research is happening in this industry. So as I said, when people refer to AI, they refer to two kinds of AI, rule-based and learning-based. And within learning-based, there is a subfield that has today become the AI, which is deep learning. So if any of you, meet somebody and they tell you AI, ML and deep learning all in one sentence, the difference is that AI is a meta word. Within that you have machine learning. Within that you have deep learning, right? So this is the website ImageNet, which led to the creation of this field, deep learning. As I said, the credit goes to the lady, Professor Fei-Fei Li, to create this data set. And increasingly it will become important for any field, any scientific field where we are going to use computers to come up with a competition, to come up with an open competition where we have a data set so that people can come and prove their competence, whether it is to hire people, whether it is to progress scientifically, or whether it is to create new breakthroughs. We need challenges which are open. And today world has moved on from a curriculum based teaching to a challenge based teaching, right? So just to make you a bit more understand on how deep learning works, so any of you can see this image? Anybody can guess what is there in the image? What is happening? Nobody? Do you see something there? Pigeon. So if I may ask you, sir, what is this pigeon doing? Anybody? So in front of the pigeon is a screen. There is a blue button and there is a yellow button on the screen, and in the middle is the pink interface. This pink interface is a breast cancer tissue, and this pigeon is choosing whether this tissue is having malignant tissue or not, meaning does this patient whose tissue is there, does she have cancer or not? Okay. So what the scientists do, this is a published paper, you can take the reference from me. What they did, they had number of breast cancer cases, positive and negative, okay, tissues, and they trained this pigeon. If the pigeon would say click on the right option, the pigeon, next to the pigeon is a grain dispensing machine. So pigeon would get the salary. What is the salary? The pigeon is getting a grain, right? So what is happening in this entire process, you are actually, the way a human would teach a baby, you are teaching a pigeon, because pigeon wants grain, and pigeon can spot from a distance a pattern, right? That's what pigeons are specialized for. So they can also spot a malignant tissue in a tissue slide. So when you are a human doctor, you are taught 10 years to be a pathologist. So you will do 5 years of MBBS, then you will do 3 years of MD, and then you will learn to do what? To spot breast cancer in those tissue slides, right? So the accuracy of this trained pigeon after the training period is over is higher than a trained human pathologist, right? So you can imagine if you were to hire a pathologist or train a pathologist, it is much more expensive than pigeons, right? So of course we are not outsourcing our pathologists to pigeons. But increasingly you will find that there are scientifically proven examples. For example, during COVID, at the Helsinki airport in Finland, they were using sniffer dogs to sniff COVID from travelers. So how much time does a RT-PCR test take? 72 hours, or let's say at best 3 hours. At the Bangalore airport, it takes 13 minutes. So they trained sniffer dogs to sniff volatile compounds from COVID patients, and they can test it within 100% accuracy within seconds, right? So what is happening in case of a sniffer dog or a pigeon? Basically, they have a neural network. What is happening with that neural network? You are first training that neural network. So what you have when you do a training, you have data. Basically, you show a pattern, and then you have a ground truth. So the reward for this pigeon is basically indicative of the ground truth, meaning this slide has breast cancer or not. Now the pigeon is not going to explain to you where in the slide I saw the pattern, but it gives you like a black box an answer, which is, does it have breast cancer or not? The same goes for the sniffer dog. The sniffer dog is not going to tell, boss, this patient has COVID because of he traveled or XYZ or whatever, or this COVID is 2 days old. The dog is just going to tell you COVID there or not. It's not going to explain like a human doctor, right? So that's how deep learning works. The limitations are somehow built into the narrative that I just told you, that it's a black box. It doesn't explain to you, right? But it learns a complex pattern, right? So when we are teaching a neural network, an artificial neural network, pretty much it looks like this. So there are layers. So we have input layer wherein we feed in data, and we have an output. And many of the times we have a single output, meaning we are only predicting yes or no. But sometimes, let's say in this case, when we are training this neural network to learn faces, right? So how the layers learn? They learn features. So the lower level features are learned by initial layers, and higher level features are learned by, later layers. So let's say if I take an example where a neural network becomes a black box, and if the neural network is trained to learn whether it's a cat or a dog or something else. So in this case, the picture happens to be a cat. So it will give an output which will look something like there is a 0.97 probability that it is a cat. So once you have a neural network of this sort, you may come up and develop a boundary condition that whichever class is predicted to be higher than 0.75%, we will take that class as an output. So if we were to put such a condition, then we can say this photo that is shown to us is a cat. Of course, now what is the problem in this approach? That imagine all the cat photos that you trained, they were white in color. And one fine day, you show this cat which is black in color. So what will happen? The accuracy of that neural network is basically dependent on the kind of data that you fed it in. So when you look at a country like India, we are coming in all colors here in India. We are coming in all shapes and sizes, right? So if you build a neural network which is only working on women, maybe it will not work on male. Or if you are training a neural network where everybody is clean shaven, and one fine day you see a guy with beard, right? So that neural network might have problems. So that diversity in training is very important, and we have seen that in COVID vaccine. So what happened recently when COVID vaccine came, like the Pfizer vaccine, they gave it to people in Norway. Immediately, lot of elderly people died. Because when they were testing, they were doing clinical trial, they didn't put anybody in the clinical trial who was above 60. But when they gave the vaccine to people above 60. So immediately the Norwegian authorities revised the vaccine protocol, and they said, we will not give this vaccine to anybody, let's say above 70 years of age, right? So the same thing you have to be cognizant when you are building an AI. It will only work on those data set which it is trained for. But in ground, you will use it for a different population. So vaccine is a very good example. You will not want to give a vaccine to a pregnant woman because the pregnant woman was not part of a clinical trial. And similarly an elderly woman, maybe was not part of a clinical trial. So you will not know how it will work. So it is very important that we will have in time to come, new jobs. Those jobs might be to test AI models before we buy them. That do they work for diversity of population? Do they work for different kind of data sets? So my imagination is that there will be elaborate testing departments, elaborate certification departments, which will say, basis the claim of the person that this AI works for this particular case, then somebody will come and say that use it only for this and this kind of parameter. Outside this, it doesn't work, right? So let me just, show you some more research ideas in this domain. So I don't know if you are familiar with biomimicry. So basically, whenever you want to copy nature, so when we take a photo today, we are taking a full frame, okay? So we are limited by number of frames we can take in a second. So people in the ETH Zurich has developed this kind of a sensor, which is called a DBS sensor. So if you are having very fast movement, let's say 1000 frames per second or 1,000,000 frames per second, you can buy this kind of a camera which doesn't send the entire frame but only sends the delta of the frame. So if imagine you want to do traffic monitoring on a road where the traffic is moving at a speed of 200. So if you are taking a photo with a camera, you will get nothing. But if you will take it with a DBS, you will still be able to do something about it because your observation frequency is 1,000,000 times, not let's say 25 times in a second. The below example is from Canada. What some people did, they took a neural network and they converted the layers of the neural network into printed optical frames. Now what is happening here, if you convert your neural network which otherwise runs on a computer into an optical frame, so basically this glass is working or doing computation not because of electricity but because of light. So you can show this glass numbers and it can tell you whether this number is that or not, because it is building a complex pattern which is blocking light in a way that as it passes, so imagine a distant future from now wherein a lock can be printed, 3D printed for your home, which is basically made of glass, doesn't run on electricity, but it is trained or learned on your face. So it will open when it sees your face and not open when it doesn't see your face, right? So these are something very interesting, I found. And another thing that I would like to say here, especially from an Indian perspective, voice, I don't know if any of you have used Amazon Alexa at their homes, right? It's a very cheap device. I bought it for 1900 rupees. My mother doesn't have a phone and I'm never able to convince her to have a phone. But now she uses Alexa to run bhajan kirtan, So she will tell computer play Aarti, right? And the computer is playing Aarti. So very funny thing with these kind of devices is, I initially thought, I will buy this Alexa, I will tell my mother, Alexa call XYZ, let's say my relative living abroad. So my mother doesn't have a digital identity, okay? She doesn't have an email. So how will she call somebody who is on Skype, right? So I configured Skype in my Alexa. Now my mother can call my relative, the call goes and it works, right? So it's a user interface where there is no user interface. The voice is the user interface. The voice is also identity. Now, very interestingly, what I've understood in last 2 years of my mother's usage, that the device has stopped recognizing my voice and it is working better for my mother. Now, I recently bought a smart bulb. So I was telling my device, computer switch off the bulb. So I thought, as a logical person, I am giving a command. This is the wake up word, computer. Switch off is the command. And if I am saying bulb, it's the object, right? So basically you have a wake word, you have action, and you have the object, right? This is how a logical person will think. My mother said, computer bulb bujha do. And it worked, right? So what is happening here? I, in my way of thinking, like a technician or a logical person, thought this is how it should work. But my mother didn't follow the rules, right? And there are no rules, when you are building things for internet and when you are building things for AI, because they are learning based tools, right? What is the point of things which are rule based, right? They would work better for me because I am following a rule. But my mother is teaching that device every day to behave like the way she wants, and it is actually behaving. And it is a 1900 rupees device. So for me it is wonderful because I can call her right now from this meeting. I can call that speaker and I can announce anything to my mother. And my mother, I have seen also interestingly, my mother keeps scolding the device. If it doesn't behave, right? If it's not playing the song she wants, so she will actually shout on the device. So sooner or later, we will also have interesting times that how the device has to also sense emotions. Today it is only sensing content. And of course, we don't want our machines to, use bad language when we are scolding them, or let's say to be upset, But I think my mother has expectations that she wants the device to, also somehow, because she thinks, that it behaves in a certain way. So for last 5 years, I have been giving talks on voice, and I believe there are a lot of opportunities. So recently there was a web series on Amazon Prime called as Mirzapur, and Amazon said, if you want to set up an alarm where Kalin Bhaiya will wake up, so I can set an alarm today and Kalin Bhaiya will say, उठ जाओ जनाब, time हो गया है. इसलिए नहीं कि time हो गया है, इसलिए कि कालीन भैया कह रहे हैं इसलिए उठ जाओ. Now what is this? So 5 years back I was telling that people will lose their jobs of UI UX. Okay? What is the new user interface? Dialogue is the new user interface. So if you could be witty, if you could be humorous, you can engage that human, right? And imagine if you put persuasion into it. So today a call center person calls you and says, ma'am, ghar kharid lo. And maybe you say, okay, mere ko nahi kharidna. You are cutting the phone. Now you imagine that is a robot call, and now it is built on a persuasive AI. So it will do a discussion with you where, let's say, every month the conversion rate is improving because it will start manipulating you, right? So those are the dangers, if we don't check it. But I believe this voice-based interface for a society like India, is very interesting. Not just as an interface, but as an identity. Like as it is learning to only recognize my mother's voice, sooner or later, it may be one day that, I may get a notification where Alexa may say that take your mother to doctor because I am detecting, let's say, symptoms of XYZ. Because there are many diseases, where we can detect symptoms in the voice first, right? So many people will use voice-based technologies in times to come in very many interesting ways, right? So this for me is very interesting, and I feel that, how email has changed the world. So there was a very elite world where you could participate in internet when you only could use email. WhatsApp changed it. WhatsApp made your identity from email to phone. Now that identity will move from phone to voice. So people may make, voice-based passwords and so forth. And since you are academics here, so Amazon runs a $2 million prize every year. If anybody can build a 20-minute conversation with Alexa, you can get $1 million. Unfortunately, none of the Indian university participate in it. But the person who is heading this competition in Amazon is an Indian guy. He's from BIT Misra. And all you have to do is, if you participate in it and your conversation that, let's say, judged by human judges, if they are able to hold a conversation, a witty conversation with Amazon Alexa for 20 minutes, even if you don't get the first prize, if you are in the top 5, you still get $250,000, right? So this is another example, apart from ImageNet, where you can see how companies want to bring innovation with the power of prices, right? And I request you to please look at it. This is from their website, last year's result. But something fundamental happened last year. So while the world was struggling with COVID-19, what happened was that in 1972, Christian Arnfinsen got a Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize was given to Christian Arnfinsen because he predicted that if in a protein you know the amino acids, you can determine the structure of the protein. Now proteins are very fundamental to biological life. So whatever we achieve in our human body, protein has some role to play with it, right? So if you are treating somebody to develop medicine, you need to understand how protein is folded. So for example, for world to make the COVID vaccine, first thing we had to do was to sequence the COVID virus to understand how it looks. Once we understand how it looks, then and only then we can build the vaccine. So protein folding is a fundamental problem to be solved. So it inspired, the 1972 Nobel Prize inspired people to start a challenge. It's called CASP challenge. It happens every 2 years. Last year was the 14th challenge of CASP. This challenge was not won by human scientists, it was won by an AI. What was that AI? That AI is called AlphaFold and it's owned by DeepMind, which is a company of Google. So imagine, what did I try to show you, that if 2012 something fundamental happens, you get the Turing Award in 2019. So it takes 7 years to build something, which becomes totally popular. If this has happened in 2020, what will be the impact of protein folding in 2027? So Reliance has announced that they want to be a carbon neutral company by 2035. If you have read the latest book of Bill Gates, which just came out in February 16, so Bill Gates says that the biggest problem that we have to solve to avoid a climate disaster is to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This is called direct carbon capture. This technology today is very expensive. If we want to run it today, with today's cost, we will have to spend $5 trillion every year, which is 5% of the GDP of the world. So which means we are not going to spend it. So if you go to DeepMind's website and if you look at AlphaFold, so one of the applications they say is not vaccine, is not drug development, is basically to use proteins to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So it may be very possible, if Reliance wants to achieve its target by 2035, that people in Reliance may start using AlphaFold or a technology similar to, which is AlphaFold, to capture carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere. And these are kind of the fundamental ideas. If any of you will pursue, I can assure you that you will create trillions of dollars of wealth. And this may sound like a very simple idea, but it is so powerful that from Bill Gates to Mr. Ambani, everybody will want that technology from you. Similarly, in 2020, MIT published in the Cell Journal another breakthrough, which was that in antibiotics, if you develop, bacteria adopt themselves to become resistant to that drug. So they basically change their structure. This problem is called AMR, antimicrobial resistance, and it's considered as a ticking time bomb. So with time, all our drugs, which we develop for bacteria, will become useless. So in TB specifically, which is an Indian problem, so you must have heard of MDR, XDR, multi-drug resistant, extreme drug resistant. What happens in India specifically, our doctors have a habit of prescribing too many drugs because they are very cheap. What happens with the Indian patient? They will stop taking the drug as soon as they start feeling okay. But when a doctor says it's a 5-day course, you have to take 3 times in a day, it is for a scientific reason, because it is to totally wipe out the bacteria. But when you stop taking medicine in between, what happens? That bacteria learns to fight that medicine. And sooner or later, that medicine is ineffective on your body. So what we are developing is, with time to come, we are developing those bacteria which we cannot kill. So eventually those bacteria will kill us, right? What happened in this publication, why I am mentioning this, that in this case, using AI, MIT scientists were able to find out a way to kill E. coli bacteria where E. coli cannot become drug resistant. Meaning, as human scientists, when we were finding drug molecules, bacteria were able to always find out a way out. But this time, we have put the final nail in the coffin. But this is an example just of E. coli. So what I'm trying to say is that these are very interesting times, whether it is from a protein folding perspective or specifically finding a target for a specific pathogen, right? That you can develop a more superior and a robust approach. So what are my, let's say, understanding on this topic, spending this time reading and writing, is that if I were to summarize in 2-3 lines, where AI fails and where it is better than us. So AI needs lot of data to be trained. So if you want to build a neural network just to recognize cats, you need 10,000 images of cat. Whereas humans, if you show a human baby a cat 2 or 3 times, the human baby is able to recognize the cat 4th or 5th time, right? So we work with very little data. There is, of course, I explained to you the bias. I had a personal experience in Singapore. I was stopped at the airport because maybe my face was matching somebody who was in the blacklist, and then I have to give my biometrics to get out of that blacklist, because maybe I was in that 5% error zone of that AI. Energy, we as a human run on 100 watt, our brain takes 20 watt. Largest neural network, which may be let's say only with 1 million neurons, we are with billion neurons, runs on 5 megawatt. So that's an order of magnitude of million. So that's why we need bio-inspired neural networks, because we are very, very energy efficient, and people are very worried because if we use more AI, we are going to consume more energy. So that's why we need to build AI which is inspired by nature. Then of course we discuss the speed aspects, we discuss the ethics aspect. And right now I believe in next 30 to 50 years, right now we are more in the learning aspects, but we are nowhere in understanding domain. So the next era in AI would be about understanding the things, not just learning things, right? And as I explained to you that AI is not explainable. So in many fields, especially in healthcare, we cannot rely on a black box based AI, wherein somebody comes and tells you you have cancer, but you cannot say where it is and why it is. So you need more explainable models there. So way forward, I believe that we need AI models, but organizations which have data, they will have an upper hand. So it may happen that if I am a hospital and I have, let's say, 50,000 cases on a particular type of a cancer, I can actually ask companies to come and work with me. They may actually pay me to build an AI for me, because once they build it with me, they may go and sell it to other people. So I have seen this in Sweden, where hospitals are trying to buy IT not with money, but buy IT with data, right? So that is the power of data. So if you have data, you can actually, data becomes currency, right? And as I said, there are going to be more and more interesting jobs in future, where we will need more people, like the mistakes that we did with vaccine, where innocent people died in Norway, for example. We would not want to do the same mistake when we start AI to decide on our behalf. So how can we succeed in the field of AI? My imagination and experience building AI solutions is that actually the engineering part of AI is only 5%. So the computer science part is not very interesting or exciting. 80% of the problem lies in data. 10% of the part is in the use case. So I rather go to people and ask them what is the problem that they would like to solve. Then I would ask them, you know, do they have data to solve that problem? And if they say yes for both the things, then I would say they have 95% solved it. Because algorithms are very standard, right? There's not much out there. And just to, also make you aware that people are working on standards. And this is one of the publication, if you are interested, on ethical guidelines of trustworthy AI. This came out 2 years back. And European Telecom Standards Institute has published their first standard in December on securing AI. Now let me spend, another 20 minutes or so, now that I have probably spent a bit of time with you on AI, that how can we actually do something for this country, right? Wherein, is it only the Google or Amazons of the world who can build AI? Or can any one of you also build something which is $1 billion, $1 trillion, please? Correct. Yeah. So that's what I said. It's not explainable, but people, that's the hottest research area right now. So just to explain to you that people who have understood that the big change is coming, so what are their actions? So European Union, for example, they are working on something called as data spaces. So let's say in the old days, if government would want to do something for us, they will say, okay, we will build a park. Why were they building a park? Because that was considered as a common good, so that people can go and do sports. So today, if I am a government and I want to do something for my citizens, what I should do for them? I should build data spaces for them. And the nature of data is such that if you do it in Gujarat, you can actually do it for the entire country. So you can call it a national by day one, right? So what in Germany they are doing, they are building this organization called as International Data Spaces Association, where they have already more than 100 companies which are trying to build data ownership standards. Meaning, if the data belongs to you and I am building an AI, should you also get paid for that? So today, companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, they take our data, but we don't get anything. They make money, right? So where is the data provenance standards? Where is the data ownership standard, right? Then in Sweden, they have just started 8 national level data labs. So for example, they are building a road data lab. So where they are collecting data from the roads, so that if somebody in Sweden tomorrow wants to build a self-driving car, they don't have to be a Tesla or Google, because they have billions of dollars to build it. How about a student, right? So the way governments have done in past common good in terms of creating infrastructure, the infrastructure of 21st century is data. And you can see, examples I have given where various countries are taking steps, right? So this is a, diagram from this German International Data Spaces Association, how they are defining the architecture of these data standards, that you should know where is data being used, who owns it, and so on and so forth. So with data, there should be some kind of a metadata, wherein if you are releasing that data can tell the user how long they can use it. Can they use it only 5 times? Can they use it for a year? Can they use it for a month? So on and so forth. So we need different and new way of thinking. Otherwise, it's only benefiting the large companies, and let's say smaller players have no say in it. Just to make you a bit more, in-depth understanding. So this is a variety of data that you see in Norway. This kind of data has existed for 50 years, right? So this is all healthcare data, like, here you see biobanks, electronic health records, and so on and so forth. So they have this data for 50 years. So imagine if you live in Norway and you want to go to Sweden, right? So what is the data interoperability of your health data if you want to move, right? So they have come up with a framework. It's not a framework for Nordic countries, but in general, it's called FAIR. What does FAIR stand for? Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So this is a comparison of 4 countries, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Norway, where blue means that it's there and red means it's not there. So what these countries, 4 countries are trying to do, they're trying to say that our health registries are findable, accessible, right? So here in India, if I want to understand how many people today got admitted in hospital for dengue, so I cannot do that for the entire country because I do not have that data findable. I do not have that data accessible, right? So for that, of course, we need to build that digital infrastructure, connect it, and then we can have all of that data accessible. So this is what Niti Aayog is proposing. So they are calling this as National Data Analytics Platform, and this is the design that they propose. Of course, government is allocating a lot of money, let's say in case of healthcare, but this is yet to happen. But of course, these are big talks. Let me tell you something more in a personal story way. What I have done in last 2 years, where I have played some role. So I tell you an example of IIIT Hyderabad. So around 2 years back, or let's say 3 years back, I was funding a hackathon in IIIT Hyderabad. So we were giving students some, IoT devices. We were asking them to build some innovative solution for smart cities. So we had a good event there, and I went back and I told one of the professor, if we want to fund a center of excellence in your institute, would you be interested? So they said yes, we would be interested. So once we funded or we agreed to build a center of excellence in IIIT Hyderabad, so we said, we want to send you to France and we want to show you how they have done it in France. So these guys went to La CNRS, which is one of the national laboratories in France. And when they saw that in France they have built a smart building, so these professors came back and they said, okay, we are also in a campus. Why can't we make our campus a smart campus? So they built a student course where their students, 150 students, designed 50 projects where students were controlling various parts of the campus. So somebody was controlling the street lights, somebody was doing something else. So basically it was bunch of student ideas. So what you see in a campus is also a problem of a city in many ways, right? So with this, what happened, overnight, if I may not say overnight, but let's say in few months, IIIT campus converted from a normal campus to a smart campus. When Government of India realized this, that they are doing this kind of work, Government of India gave them $1 million. Today they have a smart city living lab, right? And what is interesting is that, then I was organizing another hackathon, and one of the teams, student teams from that particular course also applied. So they've all also won our hackathon, right? So they also became much more confident, working on it. And what I've realized that in last 1 year, IIIT has collected lot of data from those sensors, right? So imagine if today they want to build an AI wherein they can say that the motor will not be working within a week. They may see a pattern in the water flow. And if the water flow pattern repeats and if AI is able to recognize that pattern, then they can predict that this motor will stop working in a week, right? So IIIT can create hundreds of AI models, which let's say then can be commercially exploited. So if you, let's say, take one lesson from this example, so this was the student team, that we did with the Panji Smart City. So they built a pollution monitoring solution that won the hackathon. So for me personally, what I realized that, we need to start from there, which is start putting sensors. In this case, sensors were useful. Start having that data over the year. And then we see that what is the problem that we see in the campus, and is there a pattern by which we can predict or classify or identify that problem, right? And this is, I consider, as a bigger asset. If I am a student in IIIT, if I want to build real AI, I will not get, let's say, I can get better education as a lecture, anywhere on internet today. So I don't need professors to give me lectures. But I need that enabling environment in that institute in terms of the data set, which will enable me to solve that problem and prove myself to the world that this is the person who can build it better than anyone else. And I encourage all of you to, think in that direction. What is that data set that you can enable? Now, coming to the last part of my talk today, which is on the human computation aspect. So, India is a billion plus people country, and if we think, this is me in my previous organization, CERN. World Wide Web was invented there. This is the computer where Tim Berners-Lee wrote his first, program to put humans on the internet. This is the paper that you see on the side. And when I was in CERN, I was quite influenced by work of two people. One was Clay Shirky. He wrote a book on human computation. So he says that humans today, because of the life we have trillions of hours free time every year. So Wikipedia takes 50 million hours to build. So you can imagine you can build thousands of Wikipedia with the free time that we have. Who is taking our free time today? Netflix, Amazon Prime, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. What do? We pay for the internet, we pay for the device, and we work for them. Right? That is what we do. Right? We work without salary for those companies. Right? And we create value for them. Right? Can we channelize? Because in India, we have billion people. Right? 2016, in India, the internet consumption, data consumption per capita, we were some 200 rank. After Reliance Jio came, because of the competition, the prices of data has come down. Today, India is rank 1. There are at least 70 crore people today who are either doing TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, right, or whatever is their favorite. But we can also channelize those trillions of hours to do something meaningful, right? But for that, we have to recognize something fundamental. And that is where I show you this guy, Louis von Ahn. He's one of the smartest guy I've ever met. He's a professor in Carnegie Mellon. So Louis was a bachelor student when he was given a problem by email companies that, a lot of computers were creating fake accounts back then. So Louis came up with a very smart idea, which is that if he would he would throw an image to a human and human has to type it out. And many of us have done this on internet. So Louis realized that he could stop computers from creating fake accounts by giving them a test which he called as CAPTCHA. So basically it was a test for a human to prove that they are human, right? And after that, Louis realized he has created another problem to solve one problem, which is that a lot of humans are now wasting their time typing images, text on the images. But he is, as I said, a very smart guy. So he sold this idea to Google and he said, what is that best computers in Google cannot do? So Google said, we are not able to do OCR in the books we scan. So what Louis does, he takes the OCR from Google for the words that Google is not able to recognize and throws it to humans. Humans solve it and Google pays millions of dollars to Louis. Okay. And then he built another company which again he sold to Google, and now his latest company is called Duolingo, which I use on a daily basis to learn languages. So I've learned 5 languages in university. My last 2 languages, German and Norwegian, I'm learning using Duolingo. And for me, learning languages have never been so fun. And I'm doing this right now for continuously 500 days, right? So what is the message that I want to bring to you from Louis von Ahn? So before the internet, this kind of coordination was next to impossible. So Louis has made 75 crore people do, which is type images, text for images, right? And for me, it's a very inspiring thing because he has created a new field. He calls it as human computation. So he believes that the smartest computer on the internet is a human, right? The problem that a computer cannot solve, a human can solve. It is your ability to break down that problem into a small enough problem that it adds up again and becomes a bigger solution. So what I did personally during the COVID-19, I organized 2 hackathons to bring solutions for India. So the first hackathon we did Ideathon, we had 5,400 people online. Second we did Samadhan, we had 10,000 people. The last one we did with the Prime Minister, we had 500,000 applicants. So can you coordinate 500,000 people, right? Can you imagine this without internet? Making them do some meaningful work, making them find solutions to difficult problems. So this is becoming a format, if you master it, like the way Lewis has done, he has created billions of dollars of value, right? So I believe if you combine both AI and human, right? Because in India we have more humans, so we should rely, somehow also on that human intelligence and not just on artificial intelligence. We can build some very powerful solutions for this country. So if, to end this discussion, if we were to build an innovation cycle for India, how would that look like, right? So my question to you is, it will boil down to you people. If I were to give any of you 10 lakh rupees, right? What kind of a lab you can build, which you will call as a data lab, for example, right? That can enable the same kind of a revolution which Fei-Fei Li achieved through ImageNet, or which the CASP challenge achieved for protein folding, or which somebody else, let's say Amazon, is looking to achieve in voice. So I think the onus lies on us today, because we cannot imagine that, okay, we will buy computers and give it to people and they will become computer literate. I think those days are gone. We should go beyond that and we should create data for the problem that we can solve. So if you really want to build something, as I said, start with the use case. See, do you have the data for it? If you have the data for it, I think rest is just easy. So this is me. If you want to be in touch, thank you very much.
Sir, we are talking about the gender bias, and if we are putting the CEO in Google, we are getting only white faces. That means we are having some problem of biasing, or many problems are there. So I want to ask you that, is any centralized some organization is there that is taking care of all this problem, or it is in process, so that when we are working on that, we have to follow some rules and regulation for following or getting database, because it is depend upon the database. Whatever the database is there, we are getting the result on that. So is any centralized or from India, any organizations like that are coming?
So ma'am, there is, as of now, there is no organization.
Okay.
And let's say depending on the field, so if you are talking about healthcare, so there is a regulatory body whose job is to approve. And let's say in that case, if the way you would approve a vaccine or a medicine, you would do it by clinical trial. And clinical trial, or for that matter, any kind of a trial, is as good as the study design. So if you don't include diversity, why people died with COVID vaccine in Norway? Because that population was missing in the clinical trial. So these approvals may happen and people may still suffer because the testing or the test cases are not inclusive. So we may have new kind of roles which may say data inclusivity officer, who may make sure that minorities are represented, those kind of things. But today there is no organization globally which just works on this. India has become a founding member on an organization called as Global Partnership on AI.
Okay.
And globally many countries want to handle this kind of a issue, where they want to make rules on ethics and biases. And of course we need a lot of testing and interoperability agencies for that.
Okay, that is coming under the responsible AI, I think. So that is growing in we will look forward that we are having some rules and regulations so that we can get the ethical results out of that. Okay.
So imagine in India we start cutting challans for helmets, right?
Yes.
And let's say we know that, let's say the citizens who are following Sikhism, they may not wear a helmet. So it may happen that you build a AI where people are not wearing helmets, and one fine day, one Sardarji will come and say, my challan has been issued, right?
Yes.
So when somebody is procuring that AI in the traffic police, they should have a test case wherein they should put in a Sardarji's image and say, is it a negative or a positive? So that is a test case.
Yes.
And we need contributions, let's say from research, from open source, where such test cases can be provided to regulators, and that's how they can make more inclusive AI or responsible AI.
Thank you, sir.
Respected ones, it gives me an immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for this seminar to all the dignitaries assembled here. I would like to thank our guest and speaker of this seminar who honored this function with his inspirational thoughts. I would like to thank Anju Sharma ma'am, M. Nagarajan sir, Professor A.U. Patel sir, and all the OSDs of KCG for giving me this opportunity. Lastly, with gratitude, I would like to thank my team members and all the consultants involved in the seminar, without whose support and coordination, this event won't have taken a successful shape. Now, I would like to request M. Nagarajan sir, he wants to give few words. I would like to request him.
So I'll take the privilege of proposing the vote of thanks. On behalf of Government of Gujarat and KCG, I would like to extend a very warm thanks to Sachin Gaurji. He has always been enthusiastic about the potential of technology for human upliftment. And it is always a learning experience to hear from him. And in this webinar series on emerging technologies, we have been happy to have him in the first session itself to set a broad vision, especially on AI, how it could impact the human race and what are things that are currently happening. And within a short time of 1.5 hours, he was able to provide various glimpses on the happenings in the AI field, and it has been very useful to us. Thank you so much on behalf of all the people who have attended from this hall and also people who have joined us on live on Facebook. I extend a warm thanks to the KCG team, Professor A. Patel and his team for putting together all the things. This is the first event after COVID which we are having physically also and hybrid. So I think the future is hybrid. We will have events which are online and also telecast offline, and which are also telecast offline. I extend a very warm thanks to respected Anju Sharma madam, who is the brain behind this webinar series, who has given us the mandate that we should seed the thoughts of emerging technologies, especially in 5G, nanotechnology, biotechnology, all the 3D printing, robotics. We are having to have eminent speakers, national and international. Almost every week we plan to have one webinar and also physical, so that we will have some time to meet up with like-minded people, and also online we can have further discussions. I thank all the people who have registered and made the effort to come over to KCG and be our guest today. Thank you so much, and we look forward to keep meeting you. Probably some other time we'll have more time to discuss a few things even after the session. And I also thank all the audience who have joined us online. Lastly, I'll just end with a quote. Artificial intelligence is no match for natural stupidity. This is an anonymous quote. This is on a lighter side. With this, I extend a very warm thanks to all the people who have joined us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your words. Lastly, I would like to request M. Nagarajan, sir, to give a memento to our speaker. Thank you, sir. Once again, thank you to the speaker who has shared his valuable time and being with us. Thank you to all the audience.